Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today I'm speaking with Charlene Carr. Charlene is an author, and her latest book is called Hold My Girl. Today we're speaking about her experience with endometriosis and infertility. This is something that so many women in Canada live with today. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, Charlene. It is great to see you.
Hi. Great to be
So we're
here.
we're on opposite sides of the country. I'm over in BC, you're over in Nova Scotia, and it's really great to see you because I think that this conversation is something that a lot of women, if they haven't experienced it themselves, they probably know somebody who has. And I mean, we're going to talk about your writing today, and because you're, a very successful novelist, but really we're talking about endometriosis because you've found a way to, I don't want to say combine, your writing and endometriosis, but I guess your lived experience, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think certainly endometriosis is part of that conversation, but infertility in general, because there are so many ways that, or reasons why women can struggle to have a child. I have endometriosis and I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. So I'm not always sure which is the one that's giving me most of the problems. And I know and have spoken to a lot of women who there is no answer. There's no explanation really for why they keep trying to conceive and fail, or conceive and then have repeated miscarriages. And it's just something that I think is really not talked about enough.
I agree with you. So let's start with endometriosis. For if somebody's listening and they don't know what that is, they haven't heard that word, or they have it, but they still don't know what it means. How do you describe it?
In the medical terms?
Well,
or
I
the
guess if somebody
personally?
says to you, what is endometriosis, Charlene?
Absolutely. Okay, so it's a condition where cells from the endometrial lining, they grow in other parts, outside of the uterus. So it could be on the ovaries, it could be on the outside of the uterus, it could be on the bladder or bowels. Some people, it can move into the lungs or the brain, other organs. I have it in my abdominal wall, which is fairly uncommon. I think my doctor said she's only had, and she's an obstetrician, she's only had one other patient where it was outside of the pelvic cavity, but it can be just about anywhere in a woman's body. And so every month when she would usually have her period and that lining would shed, it sheds in those spots where it's grown outside of the uterus too, but obviously there's nowhere for it to go. And so it causes a lot of inflammation. It can cause adhesions, drastic pain, and as well, issues of fatigue, just chronic inflammation. It's a lot. and it affects many women differently.
So, I mean, how did you know, when did you first experience pain? Looking back now, right? I know your pain was ignored by many people through your decades, really. But when did the pain start for you?
When I was about 11 years old.
Wow.
So, and that's when I first got my period.
So it started right from the beginning.
Yeah, I remember, being in grade 6 and having this, what felt like unbearable pain, and hearing other girls in my class talk about their period pain and just kind of being very jokey about it. Like, oh, I'm on my period again. Oh, it's such a drag. And I'm sitting there thinking like, this isn't something I could joke about. Like, this is horrible. Sometimes I'd be sweating and shaking. Not until my later years, probably when I was late teenager, early 20s, there were multiple times where I passed out from the pain. And, sitting in the ER, not knowing what's wrong, nobody giving me any kind of explanation. And it wasn't until, I think the first time I passed out from the pain, I was maybe 19 or 20. And it wasn't until I was 25 or 26 that I even heard the word endometriosis from a doctor. And then it wasn't until I was trying to conceive, and we've been trying for over a year, that finally some tests were run to figure out that I had this condition.
So You describe something that I think many women know, whether it's with endometriosis or really any kind of health challenges, that our pain is quite often ignored by others, or we're told that, oh, this is just, cramps are a part of life. Like every woman gets cramps. Or, oh, of course you're tired, you're doing this, and this, or, a lot of people call it medical gaslighting.
I've never heard that term, but
yeah, I mean, and it really is, that's what it is. And I've had my own experience exactly like you're describing, but not with endometriosis. It was with cancer, and, my pain was ignored. I was told, oh, there's no family history. Oh, you're too young. Oh, this, oh, that. But this is something that you experienced right from the beginning at 11 years old. So are those some of the things you heard too growing up? Like, oh, it's all in your head, Charlene?
Absolutely. I was told that every woman went through it. I don't think the term suck it up was ever actually used, but that was the feeling that I received. And I grew up with this idea that I was just too weak to handle being a woman, that there was something fundamentally wrong with me because all these other women were able to deal with this every month. And here I was feeling like it was controlling, like, up to a week of my life. I wouldn't say every month, because I also had very irregular cycles, which might have more likely been from the PCOS. So sometimes 3 months would pass before I would have another one. But every time I had a cycle, just feeling so weak, and even being told by doctors, oh, if, ibuprofen doesn't work, just grab a Midol, and thinking, just take it and go about your day. And when I was a young woman, early 20s, I got to the point where in order to keep a job for 3 to 5 days out of the month, I was taking 12 to 14 extra strength Advil, because otherwise I couldn't function. I would have had to call in sick 3 to 4, 5, sometimes 5 days every month. At that point, I was on a regular schedule. Yeah.
Well, but what do you say to your boss, right? Oh, I have bad period cramps this month.
Exactly.
I can't come in. Like, and it adds to that. That what we all hear all the time. Oh, yeah, well, if you hire a woman, she's going to get pregnant. Or if you hire a woman, she's going to, get her period every month and want to be off, or whatever it is. But for some women, this is truly, it's an extremely painful experience. So, did you grow up with sisters, or did you?
No, I'm the only girl with 3 older brothers.
Aha. So, yeah, not exactly something that your brothers could understand.
No, and my mother had the condition too, but she didn't learn about it until she was, I guess it was after she had me. So she would have been over 40. And at that point, she'd already had 3 surgeries for it, but they never told her what it was.
What?
They said chocolate cysts. I mean, this was back in the 70s and 80s where she'd be having these surgeries, and, where the internet wasn't available for people to kind of research and get their own information, and you just trust whatever's told to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she was over 40 before she even heard the word endometriosis. But all she knew about it was that it grew these cysts. And so she didn't even know or realize that this was the reason for her, destabilizing pain. And she had gone through experiences as a child where she couldn't go to school and she was shaking and sweating. And so she just thought that was normal too.
Yeah.
And she didn't have the information or the knowledge to see me and be like, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Because it was always her experience. And her mother as well had the same experience, and several of her sisters. And this was in an age where they didn't have the information for why. They just knew that, every now and then their mother had to go in and have surgeries because of women problems.
Exactly. Wow. So when did it all change? Tell me tell me about when you first heard, Charlene, this is what it is. This is why you've been, in so much pain.
So it was from my fertility doctor in Newfoundland. I was living in St. John's at the time. And so they were doing tests to try to figure out why I couldn't conceive, or hold a pregnancy. And they could tell it, they didn't, usually you have to go through surgery to get a diagnosis for endometriosis. But I had cysts that I was told they were about the size of a peach on each ovary. So your ovary is about the size of an almond.
Oh,
and
my
they had
gosh.
expanded because there were endometriomas inside them. And so it was a very clear diagnosis. They didn't need to do surgery to determine it. They knew what it was. And yeah, so that's when I first learned about it. And the focus, partly because of my doctors, but partly because of me and my focus at the time was doing what we could to help my reproductive health. And so the pain of it was never really part of the conversation at that point.
Wow. Okay, so let me try to understand this. If a doctor would have said to you at 12 years old, oh, we think that, or to your mom, right? We think your daughter might have, something going on. Let's take a look. Oh, we see what it is. Could they have done surgery then? And like I'm trying to understand, if you were diagnosed with endometriosis, do you have it forever? Can it be removed if caught early? Or how does that work? Do you know?
So it's not a curable condition.
Okay.
However, they do have excision surgery, which isn't available everywhere. So when I first learned my diagnosis, I think the closest place that had it was Montreal. So there was nowhere in Atlantic Canada that had that procedure. Now, with my condition, because of where the endometriosis was, if I had chosen to do excision surgery, I think it's called excision. There's laser and excision. One of them gets it at the root, and one of them just kind of takes it off of the surface. So
Okay.
My apologies. I don't know which is which.
Well, it's okay. You're not. Listen, you're an expert in you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, unfortunately, that wasn't really an option for me, anyways, because it would have meant losing all of my eggs because it was in my ovaries. But there could have been things if it was diagnosed sooner. There's not a lot to help. Birth control and minimizing the amount of periods a woman has can help because it's that shedding every cycle that spreads it. And so, it didn't really seem to affect my mom's fertility, for example, because between each of her pregnancies, she was on birth control. So sometimes there were several years where she would be on birth control. And that can help minimize it a lot. And if you know that endometriosis is a part, they can make it so that you don't actually bleed.
Right.
And so, rather than, I can't recall what it's called, but, female soldiers would do that, for example, when they're deployed.
Right.
Not for endometriosis, but so they're not out in the field having to deal with the period.
Right. Okay.
And so that's, but again, that when you're trying to conceive, that's not something that is an option. And so I think, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Charlene.
I was just going to say, if I'd known earlier, I think one of the big things, I probably would have been on something like that to kind of minimize it, or birth control earlier so it didn't get out of control any worse than it did. It's possible maybe it wouldn't have been in my ovaries at that point in time. And so maybe there could have been something like excision surgery or laser, whichever it is that gets at the root, that could have been done.
Do you ever feel, do you feel angry ever? Like when you look back?
I think I'm past that now.
Yeah.
It's been more than a decade since I've had my diagnosis. In the beginning, there were a number of times where I was really angry. I was angry that I had been made to feel inferior for so many years, that I'd been made to feel as if there was something inherently wrong with my ability to just function in a way that apparently all other women functioned. Like I was a complainer, like I had whined, and angry too that I had been so dismissed, that I had gone in explaining that it feels like razor blades or knives are slicing through my abdomen, and I'd been told that's normal. Yeah. So I'm not angry at the moment. I'm emotional about it.
Of course.
So the emotion hasn't left, but the anger is kind of faster.
Yeah, and maybe would have been a better question for me instead of anger, emotion.
I was angry though.
Of course, right? Yeah. I think that's one of how we feel when it comes to our health, when we've been told that, no, sorry, what you're feeling is not true. I'm the expert, and this is not what you're dealing with. And again, I think so many people can relate to that feeling of not being heard. And when I think that most women, and you would know this, they don't find out until they want to have a baby. And we've been groomed, I'll say, growing up to, we're always told, oh, when we're girls, right, in the 70s and 80s, and you're going to grow up and you're going to get married and you're going to have a baby and you're going to have another baby and then you're going to get a house and there's a certain, generation in there where that's what we were kind of taught. You're going to be a teacher, a nurse, and you're going to do, and then it doesn't happen for so many of us the way we were told it was going to happen. And I think that also adds to, later, that maybe the anger or the emotion when we do find out, oh, wait a minute, the answer's been here inside my body the entire time and nobody was listening.
And I think it's very ingrained in our society, and probably in the healthcare system even more so, that fertility is what matters when it comes to a woman. And so we're listened to when it has to do with an effort to conceive and have a child. And that's when I started feeling heard and feeling like I was getting the attention and the support I needed when this was affecting my ability to become a mother. And that's really sad because there are so many women that isn't their goal. And even I went to one new doctor. He had replaced my family doctor at the time, and he was looking through my charts and he said, usually when I have a woman who presents with these conditions, I just tell her to get pregnant because it helps out endometriosis so much. But obviously that's not going to work with you. Oh. And I just thought, my goodness. And obviously this is one person. It's an individual. Yes. And he is right in that it, as weird as it sounds, that is at the moment one of the best, not cures, but treatments for endometriosis is pregnancy, because you have that long period of not having a period,
not shedding,
and not having the side effects that being on hormones to stop the period would give you. So, right. But still, it shouldn't be the answer.
No, definitely not. So, I guess one of the ways that when I was reading, I was reading through your website and a lot of your blog posts, and you're a writer, you are, you're an accomplished writer, and some of your books are behind you. And I know you love writing. I know you always wanted to write. I know that this was, always a goal of yours. I only know this because I read about it. But your own experiences, come into your characters and into your writing. So tell me how that started for you, and how it's helped you.
Absolutely. So as a child, I've always loved writing stories. I've always been a reader. I had a journal throughout my teenage years. And being an author has always been one of my dreams. It's always, I want to be a teacher and an author. I want to be a veterinarian and an author. It's just always part of it. And I'm not sure exactly, probably in my early to mid 20s. I wrote my first novel when I was 14, and wow. I don't know where it is. I know my mom loved it. And then I started thinking, this is really something I would like to do more. And I finished my second one. I started it when I was 17. I finished it when I was 27. And through that process, I realized how cathartic writing is for me. So whether it specifically has to do with my life or I'm just pulling feelings or emotions from my life. And so actually the reason I have my daughter is that when I got my diagnosis for endometriosis, I was in the middle of writing a series. I was 3 books in, And I felt like I needed to search. I needed to find out more about this disease, more about what it would cause me, but I didn't have the mental energy to do that and do all the research for a new book. So I decided, okay, I'm going to give this character endometriosis. And I kind of did all my research. And through that, it turned into it was supposed to be one book. It turned into 2 books. And we follow this character through getting her diagnosis and then going on the journey to decide whether she's going to try in vitro fertilization to overcome her fertility issues. And so through putting this character through the ringer, making her deal with all her fears and her concerns and insecurities, I was forcing myself to deal with my own as well. And I came out of those 2 books just incredibly strong compared to how I was before. I went in broken. I felt weak. I felt like, I don't know, this essential part of who I wanted to be was gone, because I've always wanted to be a mother as well. I imagined myself having 4 children. But through the writing, it just gave me so much insight and so much strength. And I know I would not have had the courage to do in vitro fertilization if not for writing those 2 stories.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. My husband had asked about it a few times, and it's very expensive. I think the total cost for our first round was around $16,000. Because we had to travel as well quite a bit because they don't have it in St. John's. And I was told I had almost no chance of success. There were all these things that had to line up and happen. And even then they were just like, we'll let you try, but it's very unlikely. And
wow.
Yeah, so it took a lot of emotional work for me to get to that spot where I was willing to try. And I felt like I was in a healthy enough place emotionally that my own stress and fear wouldn't sabotage the possibility of it happening. Because stress does create a lot of physical expressions in our body and inflammation, especially with endometriosis. You already have chronic inflammation. So adding all that stress and fear would have just made my chances even less. But I went in so calm. And, I'm not going to say that that's what made the difference or what did it, but I just felt, I think the key was I knew if it didn't work, I would be okay, because I got to the point where I was already okay. And I started through writing that book and exploring that character, I was able to think for myself, what might my life be if I don't become a mother? And I could see beauty and I could see joy and I could see fulfillment in that. Whereas in the years before when, I thought it would be easy to have a child and it wasn't, I'd lost that joy in a life that didn't have motherhood. I'd lost being able to see how good my life could still be. Wow. And the books gave that back to me.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, because I think you're right. It's finding that place, right, where you can be like, okay, I'm okay with me. And now I'm ready to try this, and whatever happens, happens. But it's not easy to get there at all,
Took a lot of work.
I bet it did. I want to talk about your daughter, but before we do that, we always ask our guests to choose a Canadian nonprofit, because we like to give back and thank our guests for being here. So we will be giving $500 to the program that you chose, which is the Phoenix Youth Programs, a nonprofit community-based organization dedicated to supporting youth. So we will be giving Phoenix Youth Programs $500
thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here and sharing this, because it's I'm asking you to talk about something that is wrapped up in so much emotion, right? And sadness and anger and happiness, and that happiness being this, your beautiful child, right? And I mean, before we talk about your daughter, I just want to say that I always find it interesting that IVF costs so much money because, and once again, it's, we always think of fertility issues typically as the woman's, problem. It's like, oh, well, what's wrong with her eggs? Or is she too old? Or is she whatever? And the price tag on that is huge. It's hard to, And it's not accessible. I mean, you just even said that you had to travel because the options weren't there for you guys where you were living at the time, and it's not accessible right across the country, right? For women who want to have children or women who have endometriosis and need to travel to see specialists. Do you think that, I mean, I think I know what your answer is going to be, but do you think that IVF should be part of our healthcare and our medical system?
I do. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, especially where infertility right now affects 1 in 6 Canadians. And so that's not always the woman's issue. Sorry, 1 in 6 couples it affects. And that's a lot. And in a country that is having issues with population increase, it seems a very easy, I don't know if fix is the right term.
Yeah, a solution or the right thing to do.
Exactly.
For people that want to grow, their love and family. And it I mean, $16,000, you said, for the first round. I just don't know where people get that kind of money from without having to.
We needed help.
Yes, of course.
From my in-laws, right?
And yes, of course.
And not everyone has that option, and
no, they don't. I know there's places that do offer it, that do cover it.
There are some provinces.
There are some.
Or at least part of it. I don't know if there's anywhere that covers all of it, unless
I'm not sure
a
either.
Recent change.
That's something to look into for sure. But, it's just an interesting topic, right? Like, because it is women's health. We're talking about women's health. Whether the fertility challenge is the man or the woman's, because we are also carrying the child a lot. So, it's very interesting. So tell me about I want to hear about when you found out you were pregnant.
It's such an interesting thing. It was very exciting, but it was also full of so much fear. So I had had losses before. And I've had many losses since. And so it's not even the moment I was pregnant. It's more when I finally held her in my arms. Right. That was the real excitement. This is happening. And I think for a lot of women who go through infertility, when they do finally conceive and are pregnant, I've talked to many who've experienced this as well, that in that excitement and in that joy, there's so much fear that it's not going to be real, that you're not actually going to hold your baby, your living baby in your arms. And so, yeah, the joy was when she was finally on my chest, and that was just amazing. After so many years of thinking that, I would never be a mom, a biological mom at least.
Wow. And so how old is she now?
She's 5.
Oh my gosh. So what do you tell, do you hear from other women that have the same experience? Do they find you when they, because like you said earlier, right, we have, we can search things on the internet. I can search endometriosis and maybe a couple of other words, and your name pops up.
Oh,
do you
really?
hear from other women ever? Especially through your books and your writing.
Yeah, through my books I sometimes do, especially Hold My Girl, which is my most recent one. It follows the story of 2 women whose eggs were switched during IVF. And so in that book, I've really infused a lot of the struggles and the fears that women go through while they're trying to conceive through recurrent miscarriages and pregnancy loss. And so I've had a number of readers write and just talk to me about how seen they felt from reading that book, and that it made them feel less alone, which is amazing, because that was one of the things when I was revising with my agent, and we could kind of see the book going in some other directions, and my focus was like, no, this book is about motherhood, and I want to write it in a way that will help women who are going through similar experiences really feel seen and really feel less alone, because I felt so alone for the first 5 years or so of my journey. And actually in the book, there's a Facebook group that the women are in where they talk, and they, talk about the fertility diets they're on and the naturopaths and the acupuncturists. But I think the real heart of that is they're talking to people who've gone through the same thing they've gone through. And I had that as well. In real life, a Facebook group that I was a part of that really made so much difference. You know, when you're going through in vitro fertilization and there's all these different meds and then there's all this side stuff that you're wondering will help with it, supplements and yoga and meditation, and just having other women to kind of talk to about that and bounce ideas off of, and then just hear when things go wrong and be like, yeah, I went through that too. It sucks.
Because we need that, right?
Absolutely.
We need to find the people that understand and experience the same feelings, because, you know, the people around you can maybe understand, but unless it's somebody who's, you know, really walking those same steps, it's hard to relate truly. You can describe the pain of endometriosis to me, but I can't truly understand it because I haven't felt it. Whereas another woman who's been through it would know exactly what you're talking about when you were saying, you know, razor blades cutting through you.
And that is the thing. And when you asked before about what it felt like to have that name, that diagnosis, you know, and I told my husband about it. I told my parents about it. I told friends about it, that razor blade feeling that literally there was a knife inside my body cutting. And you know, they kind of nod and that sounds awful, but you can tell to them it doesn't make sense. And then I went online and I started reading stories from other women, and that was the same phrasing that they'd used. And I'd never heard anyone else talk about it with endometriosis before. And so clearly, like, that's a connection. That's a feeling that is real.
So when you think about moving forward and, you know, your life and your child and your writing, what do you want to do moving forward? More books? You know, tell me, do you see yourself speaking to groups of people? Or I'm just wondering, like, because your message and your experience is so helpful for so many people.
I think books is definitely my focus, and, you know, whether or not they'll have to do with women's health in any sense of the word, I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm certainly open to speak if I'm asked about these issues, but my passion is really stories, and kind of generally in some way I'm pulling from some kernel of my life, whether it's direct experience or whether it's pulling on simply the emotion or the feeling that's most pertinent to me at that point in my life, or something that I just feel hasn't been talked about enough and that I want to share and explore, because fiction is such an amazing door into experiences in a way that nonfiction writing doesn't quite give, in the sense that when something isn't actually real, you have this freedom to sink yourself into it with so much less judgment and criticism or skepticism even, and just experience it. And I think that's really powerful.
It is powerful. I can't thank you enough for this conversation. It's been so good. Your website is Charlene Carr, that's CARR.com. And that's where people can find you. And your newest book is Hold My Girl, and that's available to buy now. And yeah, I really appreciate it, Charlene. Thank you so, so much for this.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.